Facebook family, we thank you all so much for joining us. We are just getting ready to have a conversation. Come on in the room, as they say, and we'll introduce you to our guests that are here, and we'll just have a conversation. Let us know if you have any questions so that we can begin to have a chat with everyone. Here we are. I think we are ready to roll. If we can, let's do it, huh? Okay. So first of all, let me just set the stage. Let me just introduce everyone that we have joining us right now. Pastor Les Simmons is here with us this afternoon. Pastor Simmons, senior pastor at the South Sacramento Christian Center, previously served on the Sacramento Police Commission. Pastor, we thank you for being here. We also have Dr. Nicole Clave. Dr. Nicole Clave, we thank you for joining us. Everyone remembers Dr. Clave. She lost her 17-year-old son, JJ, in some violence, but she since started the Healing 5 Foundation to help others in the community who might be victims of violence. And then we have Pastor Anthony Sadler with us today as well. Pastor Sadler, senior pastor at Shiloh Baptist Church and co-founder of the Cops and Clergy Academy, which is meant to help bridge the gap between police and the communities that they serve. And so again, thank you all, everyone, for being here with us as we walk through and take some of your questions today. Of course, the big conversation right now is around some of the police reforms that we are seeing being recommended here in the capital city. Big deal today, the mayor making this announcement. First of all, let me run it down for you, some of the things that we are seeing. $5 million to establish a new city department for non-law enforcement responses to 911 calls that do not involve criminal activity. And so Facebook family, as you're joining us, let us know if you have any questions, if you'd like to share some of your thoughts or questions with our guests today. We'll try to get those questions to our guests. And so let's just begin. Pastor Simmons, like I said, you sat on the Sacramento Police Commission. Your reaction to this suggestion from the mayor to set aside $5 million to establish a new city department for non-law enforcement responses to 911 calls that do not involve criminal activity?
I think, first off, thank you guys for putting this space together to really engage and have the right kind of dialogue around how we move forward. It would be kind of remiss for us not to lift up Rashad Brooks, who lost his life this past weekend due to police brutality. George Floyd, that has started a national and international movement. Breonna Taylor, who lost her life in her own home. And then Ahmaud Arbery, due to racism. We are in a moment of multiple pandemics. And for the Black community, it is multiple pandemics within a pandemic. I think the trauma that we are facing requires multiple deposits of equity and healing. Today's announcement from the mayor was one of many deposits into what I call the bank of relationship that law enforcement has with community. Yes, it'll move us forward. I think the questions that we all have to really raise up have to do with how do we now shift funding, not just general $5 million, but I'm talking about funding that would historically go to law enforcement back to community to be able to now respond to these nonviolent situations, whether it's mental health triage team, whether it's peacekeeping and conflict resolution team that is dispatched throughout the community to respond to these incidents. I think those are kind of what we have to imagine as well. I think this is a step forward, and I applaud the mayor for his courageous leadership at putting something on the table for us to now build on top of.
Pastor Simmons, we thank you. Let's go over to Dr. Nicole Clave. You know what it means to lose a son to violence, not necessarily police violence in this case, but to lose a son to violence, how helpless a family sometimes feel. And so you've started your own organization to try and help families through. What do you make of what the city is now suggesting, this $5 million for a new force to respond to criminal or to calls that are not criminal activity, and some of the other suggestions that we're seeing when it comes to police reforms?
Thank you for having me on here, and with the both pastors, very appreciated a lot. But as Pastor Les was saying, I'm in agreement with him and giving prayers to the families and including our own families here. Joseph Mann back in 2016, Stephon Clark, those families that have experienced these type of events. I think the $5 million going into that area is an excellent idea. I think we need to relieve our officers who are not trained in mental health, dealing with mental health and anxiety issues or whatever it may be during those times that these individual citizens are going through. I don't think that we should be putting them in those positions. So I'm glad, but one couple of questions I would have is who is the oversight committee of this $5 million? Who's sitting and going to make sure and hold these mental health units or whomever it may be accountable to ensure they're actually doing the work in furthering the cause in these communities?
You make a great point there, and that's one of the reasons we wanted to have Pastor Anthony Sadler here on our conversation. Pastor, you are co-founder of the Cops and Clergy Academy, something where you've been working with the police department to try and bridge the gap between police and the communities they serve, trying to figure out ways that we can improve community relations. And so when you hear the news today of the mayor saying, we want to set aside money to create a new department that's going to get involved with calls that don't involve criminal activity, when we hear that the mayor says that there should be other proposals involving having an inspector general who independently investigates matters involving the police department, your reaction?
Well, let me say thank you again for having us on, and I too want to lend my heartfelt prayers to the families of the Brooks family, the Floyd family, the Arbery family, the Taylor family, our local families as well, the Clark family, because I found that when things like this come up, it touches all of us, but it rewounds many family members that have gone through this before. Yes. And so my first thought in this moment when we're reaching out is, how many have been rewounded? How many times have we had to go through this? So certainly want to be sensitive to that. Concerning the $5 million, I think it's great. Concerning the Inspector General, I think oversight is good. Another set of hands looking at situations is fine. Although I think the picture is bigger than this. We're dealing with, across our country, we're dealing with institutional and systematic racism that requires us to take a real look at how we relate to one another. And I'm a relational person, how we relate to one another on a day-to-day basis, on a week-to-week, month-to-month basis. I think putting funds into alternate sources, establishing after-school education programs or funding them, additional ones, dealing with the centers where kids have a place to go, anything positive, training to prepare our youth for the workforce. All of those things are positive, catching our young people before they have a negative encounter with law enforcement rather than after. And then lastly, I think every law enforcement officer or every partner of law enforcement and or community would all agree that we've put too much on our law enforcement. Every time there's a call that comes up where it requires a call to service, it's either the fire department with fire-related duties or maybe a medical issue with the paramedics, or it's law enforcement. They've become the catch-all over the years in areas that they're certainly not the best choice. They're not our best choice in dealing with homeless situations. They're not our best choice in dealing with mental illness. They're not our best choice in dealing with drug addiction that doesn't involve crime. we have people that specialize in help in those areas, and those should be the people dispatched. So overall, I'm excited about the first step.
We thank you all again so very much for joining us, to the hundreds of people joining us on Facebook. The numbers are growing even as we speak. If you have questions, let us know, and we'll try to get some of those questions answered by our guests today. I want to tell you that we have just gotten a statement in from Police Chief Daniel Hahn about today's announcement. Want to read that to you all and see if we can't get some of your reaction. Chief Hahn says the proposals discussed today would build upon changes that have been implemented within our department already. The Sacramento Police Department is committed to transparency and ensuring our policies and procedures best serve our department and community. And so that reaction just coming in from the police chief tonight. Pastor Simmons, as we've been talking about, you served on the commission, but that is a past thing because of some of your frustrations with the speed of the way things were getting done. Is that a fair acknowledgement there?
That is very much so a fair acknowledgement. And July 11th, 2015, I'll never forget that. It's when Joseph Mann was killed. At that point, I was on the police commission, actually was a part of PERF, Police Executive Research Forum, sent from Sacramento to be as a delegate leader. I spent a number of time teaching procedural justice and police legitimacy training and implicit bias, cultural competency. I think where we are at, we talked about systemic racism. I think it also has to be from the start of a thing. A good friend of mine, Ben McBride, talks about the HEAT acronym: hiring, equipment, accountability, and training. I think we have to really take a hard look at who's being hired in SAC PD. I went through one period of my life, and some of you know there was a SPD underground page. And on that underground page, it was used to say bad things. It was used to target people. And those were, some real challenging times. There was an investigation that got removed, right? But I think some folks were hired that shouldn't have been on that platform having that kind of conversation about community leaders. I think we have to really use our big imagination to dream up some change for this moment, not only for this moment, but for generations to come. I have an 18-year-old kid come tomorrow, and my fear is that we don't make the changes necessary for his generation when he's driving out in the community and has an encounter with law enforcement. That's one of my fears. So I think.
And so, Pastor, I don't want to interrupt, but I just want to get to it. So, do you feel that this is just a drop in the bucket? It's a good start. How would you characterize what you're seeing today? The mayor saying millions of dollars set aside to create a new department, saying we want to have an inspector general who independently investigates when shootings happen in the police department. The attorney general coming out and saying, hey, we shouldn't stop there. There should be a statewide kind of look at what we do when it comes to police actions, things like it, banning chokeholds, encouraging verbal warnings before using force. To everyone on the call, I want to make sure we get this response, but what do you make of what we're seeing in this moment?
You definitely heard the mayor talk even about 8 can't wait, right? Today was a few steps. There are other steps that can happen, such as banning certain chokeholds. And we heard SAC lean in like last week and really make some moves for that. I think we have to create some measures around 8 can't wait. There are certain things that Sacramento can do. Banning shooting out of moving vehicles, establish a use of force continuum, build on the use of force policy that was already built upon, right? Require all forces be reported, or all incidents be reported, and be very transparent for our community. And then holding law enforcement accountable, rogue officers, and I'm not talking about everybody that's in law enforcement, is that there's a small percentage, but that small percentage has to be held accountable. When we talk about healing, right, in this moment, and Pastor Sadler brought a great point up, that moments like this surface the trauma and the pain within our own community. It's there because it's never been treated. How do you treat pain? You offer some sort of healing. We haven't had healing around Stephon Clark. We haven't had it around Joseph Mann, Michael McIntyre, and the list goes on, right? And so yes, while we are moving forward and today was a step in that, I think we have a long ways to go.
Dr. Clave, talk about that healing, because that's one of the things that you've been working on. How do you bring healing to this local community? And what do you make of some of the things that we're seeing now? How would you characterize it? Some saying that this is indeed a movement that is getting results.
The healing portion is hard, and it's not instant. It's over time. We as victims, we as mothers, we as fathers, as parents, family members, community members who have lost our children, our loved ones, those close to us, close friends, the support is always helpful. At the same time, watching this happen time and time again is traumatizing. We are traumatized as parents. We relived our own trauma through seeing others' trauma. So when we continue to support one another, that's a good thing. But the mental health, getting over the narrative that mental health isn't for us, that we don't need to seek help. We don't need to seek our pastors, our spiritual leaders. We don't need to seek, our professional therapists, psychologists, and things of that nature is false. We have to have someone that we can talk to, and that we can relieve some of the stress we internalize. We have so many things going on in our country, in our world, and right here in SAC, especially right now in this past week and a half, 2 weeks, where we are still losing our young. We are still losing our children, our babies, our grandchildren on a daily basis. So when this is on such a national platform and level, and you were watching it in real time and real action, we are literally dying in the inside because we can't give an immediate fix to the issue. So definitely focusing in on the mental health, reaching out to those who you may have never reached out to, lending that support, those words of comfort, connecting them to those who can if you can't, providing them information, resources, and outlets to be able to sit down and discuss what they're going through, especially our youth. Our youth need it most of all. That we're going through COVID-19 right now. They're not out having their normal daily activities, interactions, associations with friends and family, and then they're watching all of this violence on television. Who are they talking to? How are they releasing it? What is their mental? What is their psyche? How has their parents raised them? I was on a Zoom call, and Pastor Sadler was on that call with me as well, where we have youth whose parents have told them over time that seeking mental health is not what you do. It's not, for the males, they were told that's something women do. For the females, that they were told, you don't take this outside of the house. So how are they dealing with this now today when it is a global issue? I mean, this is going on everywhere.
Well, you make a good point, and that's where I want to bring in Pastor Anthony Sadler here. Pastor, one of the things that we've been talking about is how do you kind of bridge that gap between the police and the communities they serve? We've gotten a lot of kind of responses in. Glenn, Edward, Bunny, just saying that she doesn't feel police are being supported enough here. We thank you all on Facebook who are chiming in and sharing some of your thoughts. I want to make sure that we are hearing from those folks. And so, Pastor Sadler, how do you kind of address that? This notion that it has to be a two-way street, that sure, police have to do their part to improve relations, but that the community then and those who interact with police also have to do their part. I know one of the things that you were doing with the cops and clergy was having police go into schools and trying to humanize our officers, working with students directly. Of course, the COVID-19 pandemic has made that difficult, but speak to some of the things that are being done to try and teach the community of ways to engage with law enforcement.
Well, and thank you, Chris. We do a lot of that contact, individual contact, group contact with the community. Our overall goal with cops and clergy has been and is to create and facilitate and increase communication between in this case, Sacramento Police Department and our communities in the hope that it will build a relationship. Because that's what it's really about, is building relationship. The things you name, getting to know them, seeing behind the uniform, humanizing, that works both ways. When we formed Cops and Clergy 2.0 and took it different aspect and a different emphasis on the schools, we went to a younger age. We went down, we were in high schools, we went down to third grade, fourth grade, fifth graders, and started moving in those relationships, building that kind of relationship, but not just humanizing the officers to the kids, but humanizing the kids to the officers, making sure that the officers aren't getting run down and thinking of a community as all the same because of maybe some of the challenging experiences they've had in that neighborhood. I found this has a positive effect. And in growing that relationship, the overall hope is that it will foster trust in the end. It's hard to trust somebody that you've just met. It's hard to trust somebody that you don't have anything in common with. It's hard to trust somebody that you haven't shared life with. And so we hope to create an atmosphere and an opportunity for us to that even exchange to happen, to where in the end, some trust can be built up on both ends.
Pastor, we thank you for that. I want to get over to Pastor Simmons. I just want to make sure that we're getting in some of our folks here on Facebook. Gwen saying, hey, take the police out of the schools and replace them with nurses and mental health officers. This notion of how do you deal when you talk about defunding or reforming. Can we tackle that, Pastor Simmons, this notion of how do you deal with that? I know in Sacramento, we did look at the school resource officers and some of the ways that we use that money better. Speak to that.
Right. So two things. Yes, in Sacramento, we did look at that. There's some great groups such as Sacramento ACT, area congregations doing a lot of organizing around that. I think this week is going to be some key decisions around that. I think there's an opportunity to create peacekeepers on campus, conflict resolution folks on campus, mental health folks, cultural brokers on campus that have a connection to kids, that have the ability to both on campus and off campus build that relationship that in turn causes crime to come down. They're heard. It redirects the funds that were going to go to law enforcement. And that's the whole idea around defunding law enforcement. It redirects those funds back to community. I'd also build upon that in saying that, you know, I understand officer fatigue and all of what's happening and the weight of that. I think the healing comes both from them and the community when we're all able to say wrong is wrong. There have been multiple opportunities for all of us to stand together and call out wrong, from George Floyd to Breonna Taylor to Rashad Brooks to Stephon Clark. Multiple opportunities to stand and do that. I was a part of the original group to help formulate with Pastor Sadler and the late Bishop Carthen, who was both of our mentors, the program Cops and Clergy. I was a little younger back then. I didn't have many grades, but as you can see, I've been doing a lot of work. And at one point, because of this, the Burgess brothers had their restaurant down off of 12th Avenue. We sponsored for every officer and fireman to go down there and get free food just to continue to build that relationship, right? I think in Sacramento, we have some multiple events and things that we've done to show that we are in relationship, but we also need our law enforcement to community to stand up and say wrong is wrong. When these things happen both nationally and when they happen locally, we need the change that has to come is built on reform.
We are having a conversation following the big news today from the mayor of Sacramento announcing some of his suggestions for police reform, saying that he would like to see $5 million to establish a new city department for non-law enforcement responses to 911 calls that do not involve criminal activity. He says those calls will go to a core of mental health and social work specialists, and the money for the new non-law enforcement responder unit would come out of the city's general fund. The other proposal is to have a city inspector general independently investigate matters involving the police department, such as officer-involved shootings and use of force that results in serious injury or death. We just got a statement from the police chief in the last hour saying the proposals discussed today would build upon changes that have already been implemented within our department. The Sacramento Police Department is committed to transparency and ensuring our policies and procedures best serve our department and community. Dr. Clave, you lost your son, 17 years old, to violence in the community. We have people who speak to us here on the Facebook Live who say, you know, instead of talking about police violence, what about some of the violence that we see, black on black violence in the community? Why do you all always
let
want
me
to
say
talk
this
about...
before you say black on black violence? It's community violence. Every culture has violence within that culture. There are certain things that play into what we call community violence that causes that to happen. When there's lack of investment into communities, there's lack of equity, there's lack of trust, right? I think so when we have totally removed that term black on black violence, because it's just not black on black violence.
You make a good point. Yeah, I'm just reading off some of the comments that we're getting in, but you certainly make a good point when we speak to that. But I want Dr. Clave, who has lived this personally, to speak to that question that some raise here on Facebook about addressing the notion of community violence.
I think the issue, and I understand what Pastor Les is saying, but dealing with a lot of the families here in Sacramento that have suffered the same loss I have, the issue is when you see BLM out there, you see them after a police shooting. So some of the questions I have received personally in that realm is, why don't we see that same reaction when our young Black men are killing one another? In the last week and a half, we've had over 30 shootings, probably approximately 6 to 10 dead, probably within the last week here in Sacramento County. And so the question that comes from the parents that sit in my seat is always, why isn't there that same call to action when one of our children are lost? Where's the protesting? Where is the outrage? Where is the sense of standing behind us as parents? Yes, not to say all do not, and not to say that some does not raise an eyebrow and some do not come out in support, but we don't see it the same. What are we doing in our own communities to stop the violence? What are we doing as a city as a whole, Black, white, and indifferent, when it comes to our youth? Killing, where is the support? Back again, where is the mental health support? Where is the safe spaces for these young people, middle-aged people, adults, whomever it is doing the violence? Where is the space for them, the outlet to make a decision to change? But once again, in speaking to the parents, and I'm just saying, I've talked to dozens in just this past week who has lost kids. One of the deaths this past week personally hit my household, hit my home, affected me personally. Where is that support? Where is that outrage? South Sac has been hit this week. The North have been hit this week. We have deaths in large numbers, just men, women, and children who have died this week. Where is that outrage? Why do we only see it on such a large platform when it has to do with the police?
And so, Pastor Sadler, help parents, help us understand what can be done, what is being done to tackle what is the issue of violence in general. We see some of the work that's being recommended from a city and state level to tackle the police violence that we see in our communities. But how can we fix our own? See people say, you don't want to talk about your dirty laundry or whatever. You don't want to get into a conversation about your own stuff. But sometimes you got to work on your own before you can start talking about other folks. And so as we look at that, I know that's been one of the things that you've been focused on, and that is building up our communities. You have the Oak Park walk that you do on Fridays to try to promote community policing and things of that nature. So there are things that are happening within the community, right, to address violence in general.
There really is. And this part of the conversation really begins with recognizing and appreciating the sanctity of life, right? Regardless of who's causing the violence. whether it be law enforcement or community, whether or old, it starts with valuing life. Every life is important. We must get back to a place to where we value life. I'm the oldest one on this panel. I can remember the day where if you had a disagreement, you pulled out your knuckles and you did fight, and afterwards you were friends. Occasionally, some kid might pull out a knife. There was never this easy accessibility to guns. Two, the willingness to use them on the slightest provocation. There's no real value for life. Every time we see someone die, as pastors, we do the funerals, but we do the funerals and we're ministering to a grieving family. We do the funerals and we see the loss in that group. Somebody's dad is gone, somebody's son is gone. We don't see that part of it necessarily, other than maybe brief clips if it happens to hit the news. But there's a void left in that family, and that not only have we suffered the loss of a life unnecessarily, but the void that is left in that family has lasting effects too. We have to teach reteach our communities over again, and I don't have that. I need to learn it and continue to learn it as well. How do we cope with one another? How do we resolve differences without resorting to violence? It's not a new thought. It's something that I was taught as a kid. You need to resolve your conflicts in a non-violent way and only use violence for self-preservation if you have to. My parents used to say, if you get in a fight, boy, at school, you better not have thrown the first punch, and you better have done everything you could to avoid it. And that's sure enough true. They believed in protecting ourselves. I remember my dad watching me fight the kid next door while he sat in the car on the driveway because he didn't want me backing away from that fight that needed to happen. So, but again, that level of violence that was experienced with me as a child, I don't even know if that level of violence exists anymore in our culture.
Well, and Pastor Les Simmons, talk to me about this. Glenn says the only way we're going to get rid of adrenaline-based shootings after a physical altercation with a suspect who points anything at an officer is to go with robot cops. He says, good luck. I think what he's speaking to is how do we re-envision policing in 2020, in the 21st century?
So I'm going to speak to a couple of things.
We know that the Sacramento Police Chief Daniel Hahn has talked about looking at drones so that you can send drones into yards before you send in actual officers to go and look at an environment first to determine what is there and what danger might be there to protect the lives of the suspect and police. So there is this conversation about how do we get creative in policing in our communities and hopefully bring down the violence that we're seeing. Not necessarily robots, although that exists as well, but speak to that.
Yeah, so Stephon Clark had a cell phone. He didn't have a gun. He didn't have a weapon. He had a cell phone. There has to be de-escalation tactics to slow and training to slow interactions down, using calling out, using verbal commands, right? These are petty crimes that as we are accusations of petty crimes, not even real crimes. With the case of George Floyd, who was accused of $20, having a fake $20. That didn't warrant an officer putting his knee on him for 8 minutes and him crying out for his dear breath, right? I think we have to bring back the human element of people and loving people enough to save their lives. And it's reflective in our training. It's reflective in our policies. It's reflective in how we do this precious work of peacekeeping. And I also believe that we can also have a conversation about police brutality without having a conversation about inter-community violence. However, if you want to make the connection, in many cases, inter-community violence is a direct result of trauma due to police brutality, also due to a lack of investment, equitable investment in our communities. You've heard for the last 2 years, where are the resource centered? Where are the jobs? What does inclusive economic look like? Because we're not feeling it, right? I think when you really begin to hear solutions that need to happen that would cause violence to come down. I'd also speak to Dr. Clave, I was there when her son passed away. I went over to DPH and we held a vigil together. That was a call to action that many of our leaders responded to, including Daryl Roberts, Greg King, Brother to Brother, the Black Child Legacy Campaign. We got together and collectively, in Advanced Peace, collectively over the last 2 years, created a network that we have had 0 youth-related homicides in the city of Sacramento for the last 2 years. That's directly credited to the peacekeeping and the networking and the preventative efforts. So when we say, what does defunding look like with law enforcement, it should not be on the backs and the burden of general account. It should come with reallocating those funds to put back into communities to respond to incidents and to be able to do violence interruption before even ever having to respond to these incidents.
Dr. Clave, did you want to respond?
Pastor Simmons is correct. But my son's case, I think, was unique.
Yes.
And as I've been held accountable by many parents who find my situation rather unique, I had an overwhelming amount of support. True enough. I am so grateful. And that's what made me create the Healing 5 Foundation, because there are so many families who do not receive the amount of support that I have received and continue to receive, be 5 years this year. So I agree. I also agree with the organizations that are in existence that are being currently paid, or some aren't being paid to do the work. But I would ask that those who are being paid, that there's oversight to that too, because I think there's pieces missing in that as well.
Right.
And so I'm always, about oversight of who's doing what and what's being credited to whom, if the work is really not being done by those who are receiving credit. And so we're still having third-party homicides. There's third-party homicide money out there. And so I personally have some questions. I'm definitely part of the team building. I believe in bridge building. I am a bridge builder with law enforcement. I work hands-on. I am part of Pastor Sadler's Clergy and Community graduate from one of his classes and cohorts. I have much respect for Pastor Les. I believe I think he's right. He speaks truth to light. But I just think there's a lot of things still that can be done. I think there's still answers that parents feel aren't answered. I think there's still a lot of work that parents would be in a disagreement with that think is not being done. And that's just from conversations I'm having with the parents out there in those communities. But for the most part, I think there are a lot of people in Sacramento County that are trying to curtail these murders, and they are out there working hard. I just think that sometimes we need to come down, sit at the table collectively, and have a broader conversation. I think parents need to be brought into the fold a little bit more often, their opinion and what they think may need to happen, because they have the child that was murdered, and they may be able to tell you where they feel they went wrong, right, or indifferent with their own youth that could save someone else's. I also think the youth need to be brought into the table a little bit more. I don't think their opinion is taken into consideration enough when they're the ones out here, one, either doing the bad acting or trying to help or being pressured by peers to do things that they may not want to do. So I think they definitely need to have a seat at the table and be asked how they feel. A lot of conversation always about taking the police out of the schools. Well, I have kids that like having the police in the schools. I talk to kids that may not like it as much, or they don't even understand why it may bring them a discomfort that they're there. And so I think those conversations need to be had, and the discussions need to take place.
I think you bring up a good point. And, I have to be honest with our Facebook viewers. We thank you so very much for engaging with us as you have. We thought this might be a 30-minute conversation, but we're going a bit over our time frame. And that is because of the interaction and the questions and the comments that we have coming in, and just because of the great conversation that is coming in even as we speak. And so what I would like to do is just have one final question, because I want to be respectful of everyone's time, but I also want to make sure that we acknowledge our guests today and thank them for making time to come in and chat with us about what was a big day for the city of Sacramento, the capital city, the mayor announcing plans for police reform in response to weeks of protests following incidents that have been happening in communities across this country for years, people saying enough is enough. And so, Pastor Sadler, I'll give you your final word that you would like to leave with us tonight on this issue.
Thank you, Chris. And it's been an honor to be on this panel and have this conversation with my fellow co-laborers in Sacramento. Just make sure we keep our eye on the bigger picture. Stevante, glad to see you, brother.
There we have him. We were waiting to see if he would be able to join us, and he is joining us now. Stevante Clark joining our conversation, Facebook family. Stevante, of course, lost his brother, Stephon Clark, to police violence. He led a movement that was able to get laws changed here across the state as a result when it comes to police force. Stevante, thank you for joining us. Talk to me. Give us your reaction to the news that we saw today with the mayor saying that he wants to move forward with police reform.
I think that's good news and great news, but we as a community have to come together and hold the mayor accountable to his word. I just want to see him follow through, and I'm looking for true leadership. I'm counting on his true leadership to think we do. We voted this guy in, so let's give the guy a chance.
Well, and I think that's one of the things that we're looking at. When we look at this, Mr. Clark, you have been out on the front lines. You've been with the protesters. You've so much so that you lost your voice out. But encouraging folks to not just protest, but then to follow that up with action. And that is to vote, and that is to make sure that you're holding your elected officials accountable. What do you make of some of the suggestions that you're seeing now? Do you think that he's on the right track here, or does more need to be done?
Yes, I believe we're on the, Chris, I believe we're on the total right track. I've always said, even when it comes to AB 392, slow progress is better than no progress. I think we're moving forward, even though it's slow. Right now is the change that has to happen. Right now is that time. The young people are sick and tired of being sick and tired. Our elders are sick and tired of being sick and tired. So we're not just fighting for accountability on all levels. We're also fighting for equity. We need our cut. We need our cut of the pie. So we're also fighting.
Stevante Clark joining us right as we were beginning to wrap up. We are so grateful that you were able to be a part of our conversation. You see he's on the move, but he was kind enough to join in the conversation. Pastor Sadler, I'm sorry we interrupted you and your final words that you wanted to leave with us as we close.
No problem. I have no problem yielding to Stevante in this matter. His direct pain in moments like these should be remembered. And I have no problem. I did want to say, in moving forward, and I think we're all looking at as we go through the pain, what does the next steps look like, and how do we move forward? I did want to say, I think we want to make sure that we do keep our eye on the big picture. And as I alluded to earlier, the big picture is systemic racism. I understand the focus on law enforcement engagement right now. I've dedicated much of my outreach ministry to helping in that area. I certainly understand that there's much work to still be done there, but institutional or systematic racism leaves us in a place to where if I'm implicitly or explicitly racially discriminated against on a job and don't get a promotion, I won't get that promotion. I might be mad, but I still am alive. If I go to a store and the clerk follows me around in the department store because they think I'm going to steal something, I might be insulted and my pride might be injured, but I leave there still alive. So, but if I am I either implicitly or explicitly discriminated against with a law enforcement officer, there is a chance I could leave there without my life because of that. That's why I understand the focus on law enforcement, because they have a great responsibility to engage our community and uphold the sanctity of life while at the same time keeping our people safe. I certainly appreciate that. But if we focus just there and don't look at the big picture, don't look at all of the things surrounding how did we get there, I often say, if a young person has a negative contact with law enforcement, not the first time we failed them. We failed them way back. We failed them years prior in a lot of cases because we did not allow them opportunities that they should have been allowed to have a path that would lead them to a successful lifespan. But then lastly, I don't want to be misunderstood. I don't want to imply that those that lose their life did something wrong. I was raised with being careful about the institutional racism. I was raised with, because of the color of my skin, being a Black boy at that time in America, that I had to do things differently. We've gotten conditioned to that over the years. And I'll be 62 next month, or in August, Lord say the same. What hurts me is that the pain never goes away. The feeling of discrimination never goes away. When I still see if somebody move their purse to the other end, or it never goes away. We've conditioned ourselves to deal with it. I'm a man of God. I have a smile on my face, but I'm a Black man that knows what it is to live in this country and still be discriminated against. The pain never goes away. And I think where we've gotten to in this moment is because, one, we're in a pandemic, we're coming off home orders. The conditioning in these tragic events has flowed our spirits and our hearts and our minds, because we've had yet 4 in just a very short period of time. We had Brother Brooks and family now. We had George Floyd. We had Arbery, Brother, and of course, Breonna Taylor, all in a very short period of time. That is, we haven't even caught breath from the last one, or the last 2, or the last 3. I could not understand how we were here again back in Atlanta with Brother Brooks. This has to stop. And
it has to stop. And
law enforcement, I get the first focus on law enforcement because theirs is a life-saving mission. So I get that. But we must keep a big picture look at what are the things surrounding this? What is the systemic racism? How do we continue to grow our officers and our community in all areas of life to where we can walk as one and in equality?
A very lively conversation. Of course, we'll have portions and more conversation coming up tonight at 11 on the LNT. We've heard from Dr. Clave. We've heard from the Pastor Sadler. And we also want to hear finally from Pastor Simmons tonight. What would you leave with the folks who are joining us tonight as we see the calls to move forward with police reform here in the county?
Yeah. As I said before, today was a deposit into a bank account that has already a huge deficit. So the continued deposit of reform and equity is needed when we talk about police reform and really reimagining public safety, or what police is. Today, the mayor laid out the strategy for building a pipeline to really take resources from law enforcement and put them into community. I think that shouldn't come on the burden of general kind of fund, even with the $5 million. It really has to come from our law enforcement, who has the lion's share of the city budget. I think the IG and Inspector General role, it's going to be interesting to see how that's played out and how it works with the police commission. I would also add that the power to fire is within the city manager, and not within the city council, and not within the mayor. It's within the city manager. And so I really just want to compel our city leaders, whether elected or appointed city leaders, to really find a path forward that builds trust, that is reforming the system. And I think we have to also understand we have to appoint elected leaders that have these same values and these same ideas and are able to broker trust through reform in a way that's equitable, in a way that's purposeful, in a way that's meaningful, right? I heard a pastor, Pastor Joy, say to me the other day, "Les, I've been sheltered in place with my grandkids who's 4 and 5 years old. And I dealt with the same thing in the 60s. And now that I'm looking at them, I cannot and I do not want to deal with the same thing here all over again. And we're in 2020. We have to change." And so my last remarks and moment or comments are, the change is now. We have to change. We have to build something that's better and different, that's going to save the lives of our young Black and brown men and women out there that have taken the lion's share of police brutality for generations.
Dr. Clave, final words that you have. Just a few. We have just a little while left, but just a few words that you want to leave.
I just say ditto to both pastors. I'm in agreement with everything they said. Just thought of with racism, the systemic racism. I grew up partially in the South. I've been followed through stores. I have been denied access to housing. I went to Grambling. I went to Grambling back when David Duke was running for president. I've experienced it. I grew up in Southeast San Diego, where when driving while Black was a crime. I've been profiled time and time again, pulled over just because I was in a car with 4 of us or more. We were scared as teenagers to be in a group in a car growing up in San Diego because it was normal to be pulled over for having a green instant tree hanging from your rearview window.
Wow.
Mirror. So I understand it. I understand it wholeheartedly. I think one of the issues I support our chief of police. I believe in building bridges with him, but I also believe police have to police themselves. I'm a firm believer that they internally must police themselves. There are so many good police in the world, but then we do have, those bad seeds. And I don't want to call them necessarily bad seeds, but we have those who have their own frame of mind of thinking.
I think you make a good point, Dr. Clave. Some folks have said no amount of training in the world could tell you that you don't put your knee on someone's neck for 9 minutes and think that that won't have a negative impact on that person.
That's common sense.
This stuff is just common sense. But, some folks say if it were common, then, that would be a whole big deal, wouldn't it?
But Chris, even in that tragedy and horrific murder that we all had to witness on national TV, that speaks to that man with 18 complaints against. We're told in the news, he should have been dealt with way down the road. He should never have been in a position where he was able to have that kind of authority over our community.
And
it also speaks to him. It also speaks to him devaluing Floyd's life. Right? He didn't see him as an equal. He didn't see him as a human being. He didn't see him as a member of someone's family. He saw him as something else. There's no way he could have saw him as a human being and done that to him for 8 minutes and 46 seconds.
Exactly. It's about accountability. It's about treating each other as equals. This was quite a valuable conversation. We thank you all for making time for chatting with us tonight. This will continue, of course, on Late News Tonight at 11 in the days and weeks ahead. We have to have real conversations with our community. We've got to come together and we've got to provide the forum in which we can all sit down and kind of hash this stuff out. We thank you for beginning the conversation and we'll continue in the days and weeks ahead. Facebook family, we thank you for joining us. We'll see you tonight at 11 on the LNT.